Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 8th of June 1924, would you believe it? Britain has a housing crisis. But first, some of the other items that have caught my attention this week. There is an unofficial strike affecting some parts of the London Underground. The strike involves men working at the Lots Road power station. It seems odd to us today that there was once a power station in Chelsea supplying electricity exclusively for the London Underground, but that was the way things were done in those days. There's a political crisis in France. When isn't there a political crisis in France, I hear you ask? Well, for what it's worth, this one came in the wake of the recent general election, in which the left, as they call themselves, did very well. So well that they're demanding the resignation of the president, a Monsieur Milron, because he campaigned against them. If you've heard of Hans von Seeckt, you will probably know that he was head of the German army in the interwar period. You will also probably know that he was responsible for surreptitiously preparing the German army for the Second World War. Well, it would appear that such skullduggery hasn't pleased everyone. This week, two nationalists are on trial for his attempted assassination. Someone who will be assassinated is Trotsky. For the time being, the only assassinations he has to face are the character sort. The 13th Congress of the Russian Communist Party closed yesterday after electing a new Central Committee consisting of 53 members. The only new members of note are Krasin and Kruzhenovsky. Radek was not re-elected. I think Kruzhenovsky is in fact Gleb Kruzhenovsky, for what it's worth, and passed nearly all the Central Committee's measures unanimously. The committee was annoyed by Trotsky's and Preobrazhensky's defence of the views expressed by the opposition in the recent party discussions, and used threatening language with reference to Trotsky, who declared that his only mistake had been that he fell ill during the party discussions. Then the committee speakers abandoned argument. Communists abandoning argument, eh? Couldn't happen today. They mocked Trotsky and held him up to ridicule. And Kamenev and Zinoviev threatened severe repressive measures against him unless he definitely declared what his future line of action would be. Zinoviev may have regretted this, as Stalin had him executed in the Great Purge of the 30s, along with Kamenev, Preobrazhensky and Radek. At no point does the article even mention Stalin. The libel action brought by former Lieutenant Governor of Punjab Michael O'Dwyer against Sir Sankaran Nair has ended with the jury siding with O'Dwyer. Nair had claimed that O'Dwyer had instigated the Amritsar massacre, as well as being responsible for coercing men into joining the Indian Army. A large number of reports were read out in court of various forms of intimidation used in Punjab. It didn't help Nair's case when it was pointed out that most of them had come from the Congress Party, the main centre of opposition to British rule. Last week, President Coolidge signed the Immigration Act into law. This was the law that excluded Japanese from emigrating to America. This week, the Times reports that 2 Japanese in Japan have committed suicide in protest. In real life, Royal Navy ships are currently in the Red Sea preventing Houthis launching missiles at commercial shipping. 100 years ago they were also in the Red Sea, but on that occasion, far from helping trade, they were hindering it. The trade in question being the slave trade between Abyssinia and the Arabian Peninsula. The new Oxford Theatre is staging a production of Molière's The Misanthrope. Nothing unusual in that, you might think, except it's in French. I have to wonder whether the Britain of 100 years ago was really as insular as we tend to think. As a sort of confirmation of that, there's been an ongoing correspondence on the subject of how people around the world cook and eat octopus. The Derby has been won by a horse owned by Lord Derby, after one of whose ancestors the race, and by extension all other similarly named sporting events, is named. In the 27th of April episode, I mentioned that Switzerland had succeeded in electrifying a main line, something that won't happen in Britain for another 10 years or so. This week we learned that the principal reason for this was the problem with smoke in tunnels. I saw this in Thursday's edition. The Most Reverend Dr. Dignam, actually Dignan, was consecrated Roman Catholic Bishop of Clonfert in Loughrea yesterday. In an address immediately after the ceremony, he made some political remarks which in the present critical condition of Irish affairs may be regarded as being especially significant. Oh yeah. Some years ago he said it was a privilege to work for the freedom of the old country. Such was the unity and harmony that reigned in the ranks, and such were the ideals that actuated young men. Let's get something clear. He was not working for freedom. He was working for independence. I am struggling to think of any way in which the Irish ended up freer, either legally or financially, after independence than they were before. For that matter, I struggle to think of any way in which the Irish ended up better off. Now, alas, all that was changed. There was no unity, no peace, no progress. Morally, politically, and economically, the Irish people were slipping gradually into the abysmal pit of confusion and disorder. The fact that the Civil War has ended would appear to be no cause for celebration as far as he is concerned. Personally, said Dr. Dignam, I stand where I stood in 1918, and today I believe as strongly as I did then in the right of Ireland to complete freedom and in the efficacy of the means then adopted to secure that right. Complete freedom is deliciously vague. He could mean ceasing to be part of the British Empire and the end of the oath of loyalty to the King. He could also mean annexing Ulster against the wishes of its inhabitants. I have not deviated 1/2 inch from the stand that I took then, but as a Democrat I feel bound to obey the rule of the majority, much as I may regret it. Let us forget and forgive. So far as I can see, no one is satisfied with the present position, and I predict that the Republican Party is certain to be returned to power in a short time. Well, he's not wrong. Prepare for that day, and do your best for its quick approach, while in the meanwhile you obey the laws of the Free State and subordinate your political to the national interests. It is not difficult to see why the Ulster British were so suspicious of the Catholic Church. In 1924, Britain has a housing crisis. When doesn't Britain have a housing crisis, I hear you ask? Well, before the First World War, for starters. Since then, Britain has been in a permanent crisis. So what happened? First of all, the war saw the introduction of rent control. Landlords were not able to increase rents. That meant that new landlords were unwilling to enter the market, and existing landlords were in many cases operating at a loss. It has proved politically impossible to get rid of rent control. Building materials also, for mysterious reasons, appear to be in short supply. There is also the unions who are probably, although I have seen little evidence for this, restricting the supply of building labour. How bad is the crisis? It is difficult to say, there are no numbers as such, but it appears to be the second biggest political issue at the moment, after unemployment. This is despite the absence of the huge amount of immigration and building restrictions that contribute to the modern-day crisis. In a debate in the House of Commons, it was stated that Britain needed to build 100,000 houses a year just to prevent the shortage getting worse, and that even without rent control, builders could not afford to build houses that the working class, whatever that vague term might mean, could afford. This week the minority Labour government issued a white paper on the subject. In it, the Minister of Health, yes, it was the Minister of Health who was responsible for housing, a Mr. Wheatley, proposes that the government should build 2.5 million houses over the next 15 years. This will cost £1,376 million in total and take 55 years to pay off. That's 1979. Worried that he might get fleeced by the building supply industry, the Minister has also published a bill which will give the government the power to investigate if prices are too high, fix the price if it thinks this is the case, and seize any business that withdraws from the market. Wheatley is apparently unaware of the vital importance of price signals in telling entrepreneurs what activities they should and shouldn't be engaging in. What this means is that there will be very few new entrants to the market. Whether Labour's bill becomes law or not, I doubt it. The government will build a lot of homes over the next 50 years. Some of them will be okay. Some of them won't. Some of them will become crime-ridden slums. Does anyone in 1924 spot this? Not that I've seen. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.